Welcome! So today, we're going to take a look at Nepal, where two brand new, modern international airports are sitting almost completely empty. Now, they were built to be these shining symbols of progress, but a series of really flawed decisions has put them right on the verge of becoming a massive financial crisis for the whole country. So let's break down exactly how this happened.
You know, this quote from our source material just hits the nail on the head. The problem isn't the airports themselves. I mean, they're fantastic, they're modern, they're capable. The real crisis comes from the outdated thinking, the flawed strategy behind them. It's a strategy that's just not built to pay the bills for this kind of investment.
So let's dive into this paradox. On the surface, you've got these two really impressive pieces of infrastructure, Pokhara International, right there near the Annapurna Mountains, and Gautam Buddha Airport in Bhairahawa. But right underneath that shiny new exterior, they're a ticking financial time bomb.
And that date is absolutely critical. You got to remember 2026. That's when the major loan repayments start to kick in, and that's when this whole thing goes from being a slow-moving problem to a full-blown crisis. The risk here is that these amazing projects turn into what we call white elephants, just these huge, expensive, and ultimately useless drains on the entire national economy. Okay, so to really get how we got here, you have to follow the money. The heart of this crisis is all about how these two airports, which seem pretty similar on the outside, were actually financed. It's really a tale of two very, very different loans.
On the one hand, you've got Bhairahawa. That was funded by what's called a soft loan from the Asian Development Bank. Just think of it like manageable development financing, low interest, long grace period, the whole deal. But Pokhara, that's a completely different story. It was financed by a straight-up commercial loan from the China EXIM Bank. This wasn't aid. This was a high-risk business deal with a much higher interest rate.
And the headline number for that Pokhara loan is just staggering, $216 million. I mean, for a developing nation like Nepal, that is a huge investment, and it comes with an equally huge burden to pay it back.
And that massive loan leads to this number, an estimated annual interest payment of over $3.2 million. And it is so important to remember, that's just the interest. That's the cost of borrowing the money each year before even one single dollar goes toward paying down the actual loan itself.
Now, this is what really puts it all into perspective. Before the pandemic, Nepal's entire Civil Aviation Authority, the body that runs all the airports in the country, made a net profit of about $7 million. The interest payment for just this one new airport could eat up almost half of that. It's an absolutely crushing, unsustainable burden. And this really exposes the fundamental economic mistake that was made here. A high-risk commercial loan was used to build a speculative asset. See, an airport has no guaranteed revenue. It's not like a power plant where you have a contract guaranteeing that someone will buy your electricity. An airport's income depends entirely on attracting airlines and passengers, which, in Pokhara's case, just aren't there yet.
All right, but the debt is only half the story. To really understand this crisis, we've got to look at the flawed strategy for actually generating the money needed to pay it all back. It's not just about getting more flights, it's about getting the right kind of flights.
And this brings us to a really critical concept in the airline business, yield. Put simply, yield is all about the quality of the revenue you bring in, not the quantity of people on the plane. You see, not all tickets are created equal. Some passengers are just way more profitable than others.
And this right here illustrates Nepal's central problem. The country's international air travel is completely dominated by low-yield passengers. We're talking mainly migrant workers flying to the Gulf, often on tickets bought in bulk at a steep discount. What these new airports desperately need is high-yield traffic. International tourists, business travelers, people paying premium fares who will spend more money and generate the kind of profit you need to service that kind of debt.
So this whole situation often leads to a debate. Well, couldn't Nepal just become a major transit hub? A crossroads like Dubai? It's a tempting idea, but according to the analysis, it's a very dangerous distraction from the real issues. Because when you actually look at what makes a hub successful, Nepal is missing every single critical piece of the puzzle. It's not really in a central location for major east-west travel, it doesn't have a giant home airline like an Emirates, and it doesn't have the liberal open skies policies you need to attract that kind of connecting traffic. Chasing that hub dream for Nepal is a dead end. So, if the big hub model is just an illusion, what's the real path forward? Well, the solution that's been proposed is a much more focused, targeted, and frankly more realistic approach. It's called the niche gateway model, and the idea is pretty simple.
Stop trying to be everything to everyone. Instead, you market each of these new airports as a direct, specialized entry point for very specific, high-value experience that really only Nepal can offer.
So here's how that would actually work. You'd market Bhairahawa as the gateway for the Buddhist pilgrimage circuit, targeting that high-yield tourist traffic directly from places like Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. Meanwhile, Pokhara becomes the Annapurna gateway, a premium entry point for adventure tourists with direct flights from cities in China, South Korea, and Japan, letting them skip the congestion of Kathmandu altogether.
So what's stopping all this from happening? The airports are ready to go, the plan is clear. The biggest obstacle here isn't physical, it's political. The real bottleneck is outdated government policy and these restrictive air service agreements that are designed to protect the struggling national airline, but they do so at the expense of these huge national assets.
And this all brings us back to that deadline. With 2026 getting closer and closer, Nepal is facing a very stark choice. The decisions they make in the next couple of years will lead the country down one of three very different paths.
The first path is the worst-case scenario, the white elephant. In this future, basically nothing changes. Policy inertia wins out, the airports never attract enough traffic, they default on their loans, and they become these beautiful, empty monuments to squandered potential.
The second path, and this is probably the more likely one, is what you'd call the slow bleed. In this scenario, they make a little bit of progress, maybe a few new routes open up, but it's just not enough. The airports survive, but they're on life support from the government, becoming this constant drain on the national budget year after year after year. And then you have the third path, the strategic pivot. Now this is the road to success, but it requires bold, decisive action from the government to liberalize its aviation agreements, to offer real incentives, and to aggressively go after those high-yield niche markets. It's definitely the most difficult path, but it's the only one that leads to a solvent, successful future for these airports.
You know, this all comes down to a pretty hard truth. The whole build it and they will come strategy, it's been proven definitively to be a failure in aviation. You can have the best infrastructure in the world, but it doesn't automatically create demand. It can only service the demand that already exists or that you work very hard to create.
So at the end of the day, it all boils down to this one very provocative question. What's more important? Do you protect the interests of a single, struggling national airline with restrictive policies? Or do you take the bold steps needed to save $2 billion national assets and finally unlock their immense economic potential? The clock is ticking.